Hello, everyone, and welcome to POWERinU's complimentary webinar, How to Reinvent Yourself and Reengineer Your Business. Let us get to know more about POWERinU through this short video.
5 remarkable individuals. Benji Garcia, Penny Bongato, June Marfori, Elaine Cercado, Ed Reyes, armed with a common mission, they founded POWERinU Philippines. Grounded on 4 values, POWERinU helps harness the power of every person and team through value-adding services and solutions in consulting, training, and coaching. Our core values: customer-centric, change advocate, passionate learners, and entrepreneurial leaders. POWERinU offers a team of internationally certified, high-caliber trainers, consultants, and coaches with solid commercial experiences in various industries across Asia Pacific. POWERinU solutions are produced from global partnerships adapted for the Philippines. We invite you to journey with POWERinU to empower yourself and your teams.
Hello, everyone. I am June Marfori, an executive coach, consultant, trainer, and facilitator, and one of the directors of POWERinU Philippines. And I welcome you to the complimentary webinar, How to Reinvent Yourself and Reengineer Your Business. So without further ado, let me just go ahead and introduce our speaker. Our speaker tonight is the Country Manager and Sales Vice President for IWG Plc in ASEAN and South Korea. He is also at present the President of the European Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines. He first moved to the Philippines in 1992, where he worked for EAC, Coca-Cola, and Dole before joining IWG Plc in 2012. He has first-hand experience in driving businesses in over 100 cities and municipalities in the Philippines. Our speaker was awarded Asia CEO Expatriate Executive in 2014 and several times has been recognized for best performance regionally and globally within IWG Plc. He is regularly cited in the print media, on television, and as a public speaker, and is active in several NGOs. Everyone, it is my pleasure. Let us all please welcome our speaker, Mr. Lars Wittig.
Thank you very much, June. Very nice introduction, very kind. Thank you very much, first of all, also for having me and giving me this opportunity to speak. What I can share is that June and I, we have breakfast with each other, through Zoom, I should say, here during the last 2 years, but otherwise in a group that we call Kapihan. So we enjoy each other's company there every Friday morning at 7:30. What is unique about that group is, I mean, I get some good laughs every single time. That's of course the most important part, but I also learn something new every single time because we are a mixed bag of profiles, and it's most enjoyable, and that's usually also the best way to actually take on some new lessons and maybe even habits. very wise people, at least the others are, but you can judge yourself after listening to me for a while here, if you can hang on and endure me for all 30 minutes approximately. But usually there are many questions after I present it, so I really hope that is also the case today. Now let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen here. It should be shared now. If it is not, then somebody speak up. But
we can see it. Yep, we can see it.
Very good. So how to reinvent yourself and re-engineer your business. The thing about reinventing yourself is something that really, it's a term I've been very used to. I've applied it, used it for decades. I'm 58 years old, by the way. I have moved country 10 times. I moved around in different industries, so different continents, different companies, entirely different industries, different cultures, obviously. And I really seen a great satisfaction in proving to myself that I could be agile enough, but it has also been a necessity. Otherwise, I would have been home in my home country, my native country, Denmark, and that's not the plan. And my plan is actually to retire here anyway. So this has worked for me, and now suddenly it is also a very hot topic because of the extreme changes that we all have been forced into exactly due to COVID-19. So I will also take some focus in the sheer fact that we have just endured 2 years of extreme external circumstances, which have affected both us individually, personally, as well as professionally. First of all, I do use Winston Churchill quite a bit, and he did say, never let a good crisis go to waste. And that man obviously know a thing or two about managing in a crisis. But what is interesting is that he said this not while Britain was cornered by Hitler and without they're not yet gotten the help from the Americans. No, he said it at a time where there was still quite a while before a time left before the war would end. But they had already met in Malta. Now, I don't want this to become a history lesson, but they already had their convention in Malta. They knew that they were winning the war. They knew they would defeat Hitler. But they were also looking at what comes next. They were very much ahead of the game, and Winston Churchill was actually the one more than the other state leaders who were thinking about how do we make the best out of the global situation after the defeat of the Germans. When we're talking about change, agility, obviously that is when we have to reinvent ourselves and re-engineer our business. The thing is just that the speed of change have changed dramatically. I have a few anecdotes, but let's just start by the sheer cool facts. If you had an S&P 500 company, so Standard & Poor's 500 company, these huge blue chip companies, if you had one of those companies in year 1920, we know because we can just look back in time, you would statistically remain among those S&P 500 companies for an average of 70 years. 70. So in average, you would still be an S&P 500 company at least till year 1990. Now, nowadays, it is barely 10 years. And why is that? Well, there are CEOs who mismanage, who don't keep up, and that costs the company. There are simply big companies that are overtaken because they don't have the ability to reinvent themselves altogether, but there are also entire industries that come, but also dissipate. They go again. There are many examples of these industries just within the last, say, 25 years that came and disappeared again. When I started my working life, I became a trainee of a big Danish company. It was actually the biggest company in Scandinavia called East Asiatic Company. I joined them in 1984 as a management trainee, and they transferred me to New York, Los Angeles, Japan, and eventually the Philippines. They were over 100 years old. They had royal family on the board of directors. It was like the most prominent and largest company in, as mentioned, in Scandinavia. Today they have 0 employees. They don't exist anymore. They simply couldn't keep up. They were not agile enough, and suddenly what they considered as big was not big enough. So they were overtaken and they were eaten. And that speed of change, your ability to keep up with that, means that it is no longer the big fish that eats the small fish. No, it's the fast fish that eats the slow fish instead. East Asiatic Company that I worked for, EAC, exactly, that was a way too slow fish. Now, what we have now, let's relate it to the COVID-19, because that speed of change, that has obviously certainly has been on steroids due to COVID. So we have been facing a crisis like no other crisis before. Crisis, by the way, I Googled it, it's defined. Crises are negative changes, especially when they occur abruptly. And that, we must say, was certainly the case with COVID-19 and the way we suddenly locked down the world. So the more sudden, the bigger the impact, right? And this was very sudden, major impact. But also remember, it's not falling from a tall building that kills people. It is actually the physically, actually the impact of the end of that fall. So we have to think, it sounds very dramatic and morbid, but it is actually the right way to look at it, because we have to manage how we are affected by what is forced upon us, and especially studying the last 2 years. Now, we were hit very, very hard, and everything stopped, and we know that better times should return. But the question is also, will it be the good old days that will return? Or will it be good days, good new days that will return? There are things that actually speak for the good old days, and that is humans' nature. We are horrified by, or we were, especially 2 years ago, barely 2 years ago, when COVID hit us. We didn't know what it was. It was an unknown enemy, but it was devastating to our lives 24/7 in all aspects. So when you suddenly can return to a normal, sometimes it makes you feel better. It gives you that, what the Americans call nice, warm, fuzzy feeling, that you can recognize the good old days when we can again resume a regular, normal life. But it tends to be, and it is always basically, the good new days. It is a new way that we are addressing things. It is, we can never sit idle and wait for the better times to return and assume it will be the same way. It will be a new way, and that means that we also have to reinvent ourselves and re-engineer our business in order to not just sustain ourselves during the crisis, but actually get not just a fair share of better times, but hopefully, I mean, like Gordon Gekko said, greed is good. We want to have a giant share of the better times, right? And when we look back, we have some good cases to study. We had some about just over 100 years ago. World War I was partly overlapped by the Spanish flu, and then came the Depression afterwards. it totally overlapped each other. It was 7 years. And by the way, World War I killed 40 million people. It's also believed that the influenza back then killed 50 million. So absolutely devastating thing, knowing how big that war was and what an impact it made on societies, that the flu was actually even more devastating. And then came the Great Depression after that. So these things have happened before. And then different times actually do happen on the other side. We saw all new industries coming up, the car industry, the mass production, the way people dressed. I mean, during the roaring 20s, the women in the past had been super conservative with long hair and gowns, and now suddenly with short skirts and short hair and different music, and it was a party. And in that sense, I hope that we are looking forward to 10 years, a new decade of partying like they did in the roaring 20s, but it was different. That's the point. It was not the good old days that came back, it was the good new days, and very, very prosperous days, by the way. I would like to take a few examples, small or big. Sometimes the smallest can tell it all, and sometimes it's more obvious with some bigger business cases. But in businesses, I made some observations myself, and those that I made myself are the ones that I also felt was worthwhile highlighting here. But after the first big lockdown, and we were able to go back into a shopping mall, I thought that this had to be the best time to go and buy a suit, because I like to get a great deal, and nobody would buy a suit yet because everybody were working from home. So you wouldn't need it. The only way that you can convince people to buy a suit under those circumstances, that gotta be by making an incredible good deal. So I walked over to Glorietta and into Marks and Spencer, and their suits were absolutely not on sale. So they clearly had just decided to sit and hold their breath and wait for better times to return. No new thinking at all. And it was so obvious, and it's painful because it tells a lot about a brand and an image, something that I certainly do not want to mirror myself in. So it's a brand that I am less likely to go back and buy again, even when everything is back up and running and open. And well, I already now wear my necktie and my suit, right? But what was funny was that I then passed Floor Shine on my way, and I have always been missing these tuxedo shoes. And the last thing that I would need for a very long time, for years, was to wear my tuxedo, and therefore also tuxedo shoes. But boy, did they have a great sale for tuxedo shoes. So that actually attracted me. So they did what Marks and Spencer didn't do, and they actually even managed to almost sell me a pair of tuxedo shoes, which I had absolutely not planned for when I left home. They just didn't have my size though. A few other examples here from aviation. I think Singapore Airlines, they use this pause of operations in a fantastic manner. They had these flights to nowhere where you would take off in Singapore and then you would land again in Singapore. They introduced that, but they went further. You could book when you were still not really able to travel much, if at all. You could actually book a first-class meal, and the plane would never leave the gate. But you could bring your loved one for a romantic dinner in first class, and you would be served a first-class meal. Now, did that help them to sustain their business during the crisis? No, because Did it really contribute to the bottom line? Probably not at all, nothing visible, but it gave the right signal. They showed innovation, new ways of thinking. Did they put a smile on my face when I read about it? You bet it put a smile on my face. These are winners. And as a consumer and as a human being, I like to buy products from successes. And in this case, innovation. I like to mirror myself in it. I feel I buy a share of that success. And as soon as we're able to fly again, Singapore Airlines are really the ones that are on top of my mind to go back to, whereas on my screen I have Scandinavian Airlines systems. I was supposed to fly to San Francisco from Copenhagen with my youngest son. We couldn't fly, it was all canceled, and I should get my refund. I got refunds from Qatar, from Emirates, from Singapore Airlines, from Turkish Airlines. I even got a refund from Cebu Pacific sooner and faster than Scandinavian Airlines. That was unforgivable in my book. And they showed no innovation like Singapore Airlines. They had no empathy for my situation. It's my money, give it back to me. It's even illegal back in Europe that they didn't do it, but they were sitting on their cash that way at my expense. I will never fly with them again if I in any way, form or shape can avoid it. I'm very unforgiving in that regard, but it's also they don't deserve the business, and it tells a lot about a company that this is the way that they decide to sustain their business, so that they are still alive on the other side. I think Singapore Airlines are really to be preferred. Another industry, food and beverage, right? I mean, pandemic and the panda bear, I think we've seen that pretty much all over the world, but it is a good one because restaurants are very typically at a ground level, so they get a lot of visibility to people passing by. So if you cannot sell the food inside the premises, at least sell the experience and get the attention and put a smile on people's faces. And by the way, these restaurants have probably sustained themselves anyway, including the one I pictured here, through food deliveries. So here is another value add and top of mind. And then some of you might know the restaurant in Denmark, Noma. It's an abbreviation for Nordic food said in the Nordic languages. It is again, last year was again for the 4th time awarded the best restaurant in the world. People travel to Denmark just to eat there if they can get a table. What they did was they started to sell hamburgers through the window, and that became a huge hit. So suddenly the masses had access to food from Noma, and it got a lot of publicity, and they could have gone even further with that. Now we don't have homeless and poor people in Denmark, but if we had, it would have been great if Noma also had a soup kitchen suddenly. I mean, you can go very far with that image and get the type of attention that, for example, these stories that we all enjoyed from, for example, Singapore Airlines that I just mentioned before. Again, an industry that was hammered, put to a halt pretty much the hotels. Now here in the Philippines, one way that they could sustain themselves was, of course, through the quarantine facilities that we were all forced to use if we traveled and so on. So that was great for them and was a one solution that pretty much helped some businesses entirely. Others, though, they converted into offices. In my line of business, I'm with IWG, that is reaches and spaces, so flexible workspace on flexible terms, which includes also duration. So there was a lot of hotels that actually partnered up with us globally and then they removed the bed from the hotel rooms and they put in a bigger desk and so on. And suddenly people could go to the hotel room and work for a day instead of working from home, competing with the roosters and the barking dogs and the speed of the internet based on the children also getting education from home and so on. We all know the stories and the experiences. There also, I saw some other, there was a hotel that sent letters to all their regular customers saying how much they missed them and so on. But until they could welcome us back, please accept a small token to get a scent of the hotel experience. So all of these small shampoos and soaps and so on, instead of just having them locked up forever during the COVID close downs, they actually sent them out as small tokens to their customers. So again, a smile, it's different, and they become very much top of mind. It's a fantastic opportunity to really capture customers and retain customers when you do these things at a time where you actually have nothing else to offer them. So brilliant thinking. I believe there were some that even sent out towels and bathrobes, but hopefully only to their very best customers. But same concept, great thinking. I believe that when we have to reinvent ourselves, it is very much, and in a world where the speed of change is so rapid, we have to all the time find leverage in relations, not least between generations. I think many of us remember the movie The Intern with Robert De Niro, and he had become a widower, he is retired, and then to get out, he becomes an intern. And I forgot this actress' name. She has an IT company and up and coming. She's very dynamic, very entrepreneurial. She can do an IPO, but give up some ownership. She also is struggling a bit in her marriage because of her career. And suddenly those two, they are together because he becomes the intern. She thinks it must be a mistake. Her fancy office happens to be an old factory, or rather printing shop. It actually was where he was the CEO, and her corner office used to be his office, but she only discovers that much later. What is the point of this movie is that gradually they actually they grow together, they find leverage in their differences. His experience versus her entrepreneurship. She ends up making decisions about IPO and marriage that she never would have gotten without finding herself and the right answers through her partnership in directly or indirectly processing these issues with the guy played by Robert De Niro. And to the left, I have a picture of myself. I build communities in co-working. And it is actually a point here that us proud baby boomers, stuffy baby boomers like myself with our neckties, that we interact with the Gen Z and millennials. Like here is one of my colleagues actually in Bangkok. But anyway, could have been any Gen Z in their blue jeans and white t-shirts. Our research show that they're very successful, these young millennials and so on, very entrepreneurial. They're doing great, but they really they seek connections and mentorship. And if they could have access to a mentor with somebody with more experience, they would really like to do so. We also have to remember that whether it is Robert De Niro or playing that role to the right, or myself there to the left, with the speed of change, in order to keep up, where entire industries just disappear and companies become obsolete, I personally can easily become obsolete almost overnight with these rapid changes. And with things being this rapid, I do not have the luxury of taking time out to go back on the school bench. By the way, we can't even do that now with COVID, but even pre-COVID, I wouldn't have that luxury. So these community buildings are very important for me too. I don't necessarily just want to have my employees given access to a community because I know my employees, they're younger than me, they like to belong to a community. So now I can attract more talents and I can retain them better by offering them access to a community. No, I, as the, if not big, then definitely old boss, 58 years old, I certainly rely on getting knowledge from these people, especially Gen Z that graduated most recently. That's my access to the most recent knowledge. So communities and getting leverage between the generations, absolute key in our development and keeping up. So hereby a very bold statement, knowledge is not power. Many of us grew up learning that knowledge is power. Is knowledge powerful? Absolutely, but it is not power any longer. Real power is access to knowledge. So I'm back to the communities, the interactions, the networking. That picture to the left, that's one of our many pre-COVID community events in the room that I'm seated in right now for our flexible workspace. But I have always enjoyed networking. So I picked the most extreme picture I could here to the right, me with the president and others. But among my many super interesting friends was a longtime Chinese ambassador to Denmark, Ambassador Xi, and him and I, we spoke about many things. And one time he says to me, Mr. Wittig, you are doing the right thing because know-how, very good. Know-who, much better. And that one, know-how, very good. Know-who, much better. It couldn't be more right. At first, I actually disagreed with him. I said, no, that must be more like in China and other places, not in Denmark or in the Western world. But it is correct because you access knowledge and you build relationships. And because if this is the way we have to learn and develop and reinvent and re-engineer, it even becomes difficult now to say work-life balance, because when are we not working? I'm working all the time, or I'm not working all the time, depending how to look at it, but I learn all the time, that's for sure. So I don't really separate the two. So I'm not going to talk about how to network, but I actually do teach young people in how to network. But network has a lot to do with what are relations, what is a good relation, right? I mean, when we walk into a networking event, most of us feel very uncomfortable. That's natural. We see a lot of people who are already talking with each other, and I don't know anybody. I'm standing out like a sore thumb here. But the fact is that those that are talking, they're not networking because they're talking to somebody because they knew them already. No, you're going in there to meet somebody new. So there are different ways of doing that. But when you then get into the dialogue with them, what really will be the trigger is that, how should I put it? We shouldn't, of course, I'm not asking that we should fall in love with each other like we were 16 years old again, but it is, we have to connect by mind, but also by heart. And it could be humor, it could be shared interest, it could be that the person you talk to, you find out, oh, you're also a step-parent, so am I. There are many, many things. So regardless how different we are, there will always be common things. So forget about quickly switching business cards, because that will never be the lasting connection. The lasting connection is when you just have that fantastic laugh together, or other things that matters of substance that makes you connect. And there will always be something, trust me. I'm going on to another business example here before we open up for Q&A. This is my own industry with IWG, which is Regis and Spaces and HQ. Those are our brands here in the Philippines, but it is flexible workspace as a service with co-working and so on. And there's no doubt that COVID-19 really affected our industry, because suddenly everybody were forced to work at home, from home. So many big corporations had not yet even considered the option of allowing people to work anywhere else than the traditional head office in the CBD area. And now we're all forced into this biggest flexible working experiment in history. And it was a fantastic lesson. The employees have actually wanted this for quite a while, and now they got the opportunity to prove their worth that way. And the CEOs certainly learned that people can be trusted much more than they thought. They can be much more productive by not wasting time between point A and B. And there was such big savings to be obtained by not having all of these floors for the conventional head office in the CBD area, but maybe allowing more a different type of work model. And that is what it shows now, that when we gradually will be able to return 100% to work, almost, I believe it is now 87% of all companies will retain a degree of hybrid working. And that is really what will be the legacy of COVID-19, the hybrid working. About less than 10 years ago, maximum 3% of commercial office space was flexible workspace. That had, by the time we reached COVID, it was maybe 8% or less probably. But Standard & Poor's, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Jones Lang LaSalle, many big firms were predicting that in less than 10 years, 30% of all commercial office space, one way or the other, would become flexible workspace. So there was some focus on it, but thanks to COVID, you can say that the future of work has arrived early, and we learned these lessons. We also, there are so many beautiful examples. For example, the CEO in his or her corner office, there were so many people who normally would never be invited into that office, but with Zoom or MS Teams, whatever we are using, so many would suddenly be on the same calls as the CEO. And I think if anybody are going to come out a bit as the losers here, that's my own thesis, then it could be middle management, but the winners are obviously the employees, the people, the flexibility, the hybrid working, the outside the CBDs, the outskirts, the suburbs, the provinces, and we see that already. And it was actually a trend, a move that the government was already urging. So this has just really empowered that even more so here in the Philippines, which is great, by the way. So again, hybrid working, that means that you have access to different locations where you can drop in. We have a very big network, 3,500 locations globally in 120 countries, by far the biggest in the world. And to give you some big examples, we have over 8 million members now, but the majority of those actually, after more than 30 years in business, the majority of the 8 million joined us during COVID. And a few examples, Standard Chartered Bank. Banks have always said you must work at the bank's office because we have data security and so on. So it's very difficult for a bank to tell people to work from home because they don't have firewalls. So Standard Chartered Bank last year, they bought 95,000 memberships from us. So they have 95,000 named employees who can just drop in at any of our co-working facilities and spend some hours or a day or half a day there. There was another company, NTT, a Japanese, today primarily, mostly investment company, originally a telecom company. They bought over 300,000 memberships from us. So they have over 300,000 named employees who on a daily basis rely on our network to do their hybrid working. So extremely good example of reinventing yourself amid the situation and the changes that came along with COVID. And here at the end, we have heard this many times before, but it is amazing that a guy so many years ago, Charles Darwin, could come with this statement that is so pertinent now, that it is not the strongest species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the most responsive to change, because that is certainly what is the case now also. And with that, let me stop sharing. Yeah, I spent a little bit, 5 minutes longer than I thought I would. But anyway, I'm very open to questions, please.
Well, thank you very much, Lars. And please, everyone, give a round of applause, albeit virtually if you can, maybe through some emoticons or certainly, Lars, what can I say? Such a highly informative, insightful presentation with innovative ideas in the concrete and best practices to boot. We are much wiser with your presentation. We're actually now opening the floor for questions, and we will request the audience to send your questions, please, through the chat box, or you can raise your hand so you can be called and unmuted. In the meantime, as you're thinking of your questions, I will throw a first one. But before that, because Lars did make reference to what we do as every Friday, which is a Kapihan, an informal group, but really around the American Chamber of Commerce. We call it AmCham Kapihan Fridays. We are driven by the aspiration, right, Lars, to solve the world's problems, right? And well, we might actually end up creating new ones while we're pursuing this goal. I think history will prove that maybe we did. But for the sake of the audience, it is nice to know and be assured that Lars is on the side of those who are able to solve them. I will not tell you which group I belong to. All right. So, but thank you once again, Lars. And so while we're waiting for them to throw in their questions, Lars, here's something that kind of grabbed me. You know, somewhere in the middle of your presentation, before you show the video, and this will be my adaptation now. I'm not sure if I caught the words verbatim. You said that innovation does not need to make money, right? Maybe not immediately. I think you were making reference to the customer experience. Now, is this something you can make a comment on, Lars?
Well, it's interesting these days to focus on an experience much more so than a product or a service, a solution, just the experience altogether. Then afterwards you can attach the services, the brands and whatever. In this case, I mean, of course, I'm a businessman, so don't get me wrong. I want to make money and I love making money. But if COVID is closing down my business, and if I'm in aviation and my plane has to stand on the ground, I mean, a plane standing on the ground makes no money. That is a very safe statement. You don't have to have an MBA to make that conclusion. And by the way, I don't either, so don't think that you're listening to a very well-read person, but I do like to observe. And while that plane is standing on the ground, if you can make an experience out of it, that will certainly help you make money in the new but different and much better times when they literally take speed again and
all right,
airflow under the wings. I had let me give you another example. One of the fast food chains invited me to come and provoke and speak for their owners, top management here in the Philippines. So now you know who it is probably. And I said, first of all, you have to rethink who are you competing with, right? And typically you would think about, well, if I'm selling Coca-Cola, I must be competing with Pepsi and so on. But that's not necessarily the case. If you're selling fast food, you might be competing with Lego toys. I always use Lego because I'm from Denmark and my son is working for Lego. So that's an easy one for me. And they're like, how can fast food be competing with Lego toys? Well, if little Nonoy is turning 8 years old and the parents wants to give him a great day, he might want that birthday party experience at the fast food restaurant, but at the same time he also wants Lego, which is, I know, quite expensive. So maybe it can only be one or the other. That is literally you're competing for the same money, the same buying power. And we also talked about that fast food restaurant and what are they really selling? And if you think about the fact that they're selling an experience, then you are immediately, you get rid of the venue. So if it was that birthday party and that magic that is associated with that for little Nonoy on his 8-year-old birthday party, if you look at what magic that he's looking for and not just the food, well, if it is food to be delivered, maybe we should deliver more than food. Maybe we should have offer that they can get a clown for free if it is so and so many meals, whatever, so that they bring that magic to the home and think outside. I mean, we're just forced ourselves to say, okay, it has to be within the restaurant, otherwise the same atmosphere that with feel and smell. I mean, go into Starbucks anywhere in the world, right? You have the smell, the feel, everything is, you know, it is Starbucks. But imagine if Starbucks had to remain Starbucks, but they could not let anybody into their restaurants. How could you still bring that in same feeling? So again, we are back to not just your mind or your palate, but your heart and your stomach, you know, that nice warm, fuzzy feeling that you associate with Starbucks.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Lars. Now, here's a question that was sent to me, Lars. It may have been partially answered by your first question, but let me say it just the same as it was sent to me. Today, Lars, everyone is going digital, and we know that everyone's adopting technology as a platform, or let's call it what it is. A lot of people call it as an enabler, but it has become very competitive. And to be genuine about it, everyone has access to the same technology. So the playing field is almost level. Lars, when you look at technology-driven businesses or businesses that use the same technology accessible to everyone. So how does one differentiate oneself?
Yeah, that depends how we decide to use the technology, right? Because we have access to so much information now that, I mean, it is something we didn't have access to before. Before it would be a choice. If I should work outside regular work hours, for example, I would basically need to have a fax machine. I'm not sure if everybody on this call even know what a telefax machine is. But I actually had a telefax machine installed in my home in Singapore, and that enabled me to work on Saturdays and so on, because there would be maybe a fax ticking in from the head office overnight. Now everybody have that access, they have that fax machine, and everybody are actually on 24/7. So that has changed a lot of lifestyles and so on. So it is not, I mean, it's not the technology alone, it is the way that we apply it. In my industry, technology was the first game changer, because that really enabled you to work whenever, wherever. It was just that the employers were not convinced yet that they should allow the employees to work that flexibly. But the fact is today, how can you convince a millennial that they have to get up early so that they can commute for 1.5 hours, so that they can sit in front of a computer and next to a telephone? Excuse me, they can do that at home. So it's sort of like, again, you have to look at the situation and not just to focus on the technology. The technology is really the enabler.
Right. So the information may be much more easily accessible to you now because of technology, but it's how you use that information to your advantage.
But then look back, I mean, 10 years ago when Facebook really started to become big, right? So then their motto was, we connect people, connecting people. And then suddenly they realized that connecting people, that's not really like building relationships, right? Remember I was talking about relationships earlier. So then they started, much later than us, by the way, at IWG, they started saying, they changed it to, we build communities. But here we just have to remember that people are social animals, especially us here, you know, living here in the Philippines, right? And it has a totally different aspect when we can meet and connect differently. And the thing is that it's great to have these Zoom meetings and so on, but almost every single Zoom meeting, including Kapihan, I know I'm meeting with people that are on that same call because we knew each other beforehand. I don't necessarily make new connections, but that happens when I walk into the networking event hosted by a chamber or an embassy or whatever else it is, a car club, whatever.
So Lars, that builds on a statement that was given to you by then the ambassador to Denmark from China, who said, not know how, but know who.
Yes, exactly. And he was so right. And we had a great relationship. I mean, we really enjoyed each other's company. And of course, we brought value to each other, but we wouldn't have spent that much time on each other if we didn't also enjoy it. And I had a similar situation with the Japanese ambassador, and I thought it was so funny every year when I was invited for the Emperor's birthday celebration, because I was the only one who was invited primarily because we were good friends. We just had that relation. We just enjoyed each other's company. We enjoyed listening to each other, laughing with each other and so on. And if I invited him for a luncheon to meet with some of my customers and bring some value to them, he would never turn me down. We just had that thing going, but everybody else he invited, there was the royal family, and it was the CEO and chairman of the biggest companies. And at that time, I had my own little Mickey Mouse company. I was not in that category.
Okay. Hey, Lars, you know, unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, but I'm going to try to squeeze one out of you, the last question. Unfortunately, I'm given a signal by our technical director that we must wrap up in 2 minutes, but let me see if I can ask this really quick, and I hope to squeeze one out of you. Lars, you know, we know that maybe a decade or so before COVID even, the world has been talking about dramatic, rapid, and increasing or accelerating change. You know, about a decade back, we heard the term VUCA. And even today, VUCA, they say, has expired. They're now talking about BANI. That's the new term. But it's not about that, Lars. You know, so now COVID hit us. So to Charles Darwin's statement, is it being responsive is now passé? And what can you say to the people out here in the audience looking at someone who has definitely established himself successfully about making a case of being proactive, being the initiator, as opposed to being responsive to changes? Lars?
Well, you need to be adaptive. Yes, so Darwin is correct, but I mean, we also Homo sapiens. So since we supposedly not always that wise, that well, but we are supposed to be thinking beings, which, you know, at a much higher degree than other living animals, species here on planet Earth. Then it also goes back to Winston Churchill, right? And never waste a good crisis. So think ahead. And that is where I guarantee you there are companies that will not understand why they cannot reclaim their old market shares when the better times come back. It's because they didn't adapt well enough. They survived fine, but suddenly they are very secondary because things comes back, but in a different way. So that is the opportunity for all of us to actually get these giant shares instead of fair shares of any market. And they keep changing, and industries also come and go, and we see it. We're just seeing some extreme cases now at an extreme speed, but it will continue to be fast and furious, and hopefully lots of fun too.
Well, thank you so much, Lars. So bad that we have only so much time, but we thank you for accommodating us. I would like to believe that you've helped solve a lot of the world's problems. We just hope that I don't create new ones. So please, everyone in the audience, a round of applause, virtual applause, or some emoticons for our presenter for this evening, this morning, or this afternoon for you, Lars. So thank you very much again, Lars.
Thanks,
and Yeah, and now to the audience, we'd like to thank you for joining us in this complimentary webinar, and we look forward to having you join us again on March 10 for the webinar called Rethinking Leadership, Reimagining the Future. Our next webinar speaker will be Dr. Ramon B. Segismundo, who is a strategic human resources and business consultant, leadership coach, business thought leader and influencer, a business strategy and global management faculty with the De La Salle Graduate School of Business, and co-chair of the newly formed Strategic Human Resources Subcommittee of the Management Association of the Philippines. As pandemics and variants arrive and depart, climates change in an unprecedented fashion, social inequalities rise, and political tensions are simmering. So leaders in private, public, and civil society sectors are faced with challenges to their organizations and themselves in ways that they have never seen before. So please join us in this webinar, and let's listen to Dr. Ramon Segismundo, who will make the case for 5 rethinking leadership imperatives to create a better future for their organizations and the ecosystems they are in. Go green/blue, think meta, radically equalize, drive people first, and champion learning. Now, everyone who registered in this webinar will automatically get an email invite to our next webinar. And lastly, everyone can access the recording of this webinar through POWERinU's website, Facebook page, and YouTube channel. Before we officially end, we'd like to request 10 seconds of your time. Please answer this short poll so that we can get your feedback. Just click the link we sent in the chat box or scan the QR code that is presently on the screen. Your responses will help us further improve, so thank you in advance for your feedback. So once again, Lars, thank you very much. Thank you to all of you here on Zoom and on Facebook Live. It has been a pleasure for you to join us, and for Lars to accommodate us. Have a good day, a good evening, a good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us, and see you on March 10. Thank you.